Well, countdown to the new Prime Minister, 13 days. All the evidence points to Boris Johnson winning the leadership, and we've been sporadically examining what that might mean for Britain. One consequence, much talked about, is that Boris Johnson might lead to a general election this summer or autumn. A House of Commons library paper published this week looks at a couple of scenarios, and those get you to three probable election dates. So brace yourself. 19th or 26th of September or the 24th of October. But lots of other scenarios are available than the ones in there. So we have two commentators who understand the thinking of the Johnson camp and the parliamentary maths. Katy from The Spectator, Tom Harwood from the Guido Fawkes website. Very good afternoon to you both. Now, I want you each to start by setting out a scenario that is a plausible scenario and it gets you to an election. Tom.
Right, so in the event that Boris doesn't manage to secure a deal, I think he probably will, given the threat of no deal, but in the event that he doesn't, what we're going to find is a massive amount of resistance in Parliament to no deal. I think there are some mechanisms in order to bypass Parliament, in order to use different little tricks to get through that period, but in the event of no deal, there's going to be so much legislation that needs to be passed, and a hung Parliament is not very tenable for that situation. So I'm thinking of around the date of the 10th of October, which was actually the last time there was...
Sorry, that's the election on the 10th
of October. The election on the 10th of October.
And how do we get to that?
We get to that...
Boris Johnson calls it.
Boris Johnson calls it, exactly. It's called a month and a half beforehand, and that enables a new parliament to be in there before the date of leaving the EU.
Right. And he calls the election and says, I'm going to the country, it's Parliament, blocking my way.
Exactly. He calls it on basically a no-deal manifesto.
Right. And so that he thinks is going to kill the Brexit Party.
Well, Nigel Farage has said himself that the only way that he doesn't stand against Conservative MPs in the next election is if they're gunning for no deal.
And so that will be an October the 10th election to give him still 3 weeks to sort out the details of no deal, basically.
Yeah.
Katy Balls. That's one scenario. Have you got another one for us?
Yeah, so I think Tom's right to say there are scenarios which you can envision Boris Johnson actually calling this election, begrudgingly, but doing so. But the scenario in which he doesn't get to call it is one that's often spoken about, particularly by those Conservative MPs who don't like no deal. And that's the idea of bringing down the government in a confidence motion. Now, I think for this to happen, we would see Boris Johnson clearly picked in 2 weeks' time to be the Prime Minister, spent his summer trying to do some Brussels diplomacy, get this concession, though we don't know for sure what concession it is.
Same as Tom's scenario,
exactly.
Probably at that point.
And then when it looks as though that isn't going to happen and he starts to head towards no deal, you start to see these Tory MPs teaming up with opposition MPs to try and prevent no deal. Now, Dominic Grieve has been the most vocal so far, but we're also hearing about the Gawkwood squad. That's David Gawk and David Lillington and all these cabinet ministers we expect to leave government in the next couple of weeks. They team up and they find a way for Dominic Grieve to take over the order paper, hijack a bill, and in doing that pass a law insisting that Boris Johnson seek an Article 50 extension. Now, at this point, you could see Boris Johnson hit back by saying, OK, we'll seek an Article 50 extension, but only if Brussels do X, Y, Z, and these are things Brussels are clearly not going to do. I think at that point, Parliament would think we tried every way other than a confidence motion to try and stop no deal. And the only way to really stop it is to bring down the government. So you would get to that confidence vote. And I think at the moment it'd be on a knife edge in terms of the numbers. But say they had enough, you bring down the government in a confidence vote, you have 2 weeks to form a new government, that fails to bring about one, and then you go into a general election. And I think that would happen in October.
Right. Particular date?
I'm not going to be as skilled as Tom on this and come up with a specific date, but we can go for 24th if we want namesake.
Can I ask, Tom, do you have a scenario where we don't have an election out of interest? Either confidence vote gives us one, potentially, or he could call one. Do we not have one?
I might be being wildly optimistic here, but I think that there's probably more chance of securing a deal than not. We've heard a lot of German voices actually in the last month or so talk about potentially a time limit on the backstop, something like that would enable the current deal modified to pass. That would mean that Boris Johnson would then have a good few months riding out as PM, but also find this...
So then he gets the deal through.
So he gets the deal through, but even then, what we found... Well, whenever we have a minority government, whenever we're in this sort of hung parliament Parliament situation, there is this air of crisis, this air of stubbornness, not being able to get things done. That, I think, would reach a fever pitch, get too frustrating, and we'd have a poll in June.
June next year.
June next year.
Yeah, okay. And Katy?
Yeah, and I think actually speaking to Boris Johnson supporters recently, I think that third scenario is Boris Johnson calls the general election, but after he has passed a Brexit deal, because there is a sense that if he could pass a Brexit deal, you would get this poll bounce. And that might be the right time to try and go and get that majority. Because otherwise you might have, if this is a backstop change you get, so a time limit to the backstop, you might be otherwise going into a general election at a point when people start to think, well, Brexit has apparently happened, but not much has actually happened. So I think there are some in the Johnson camp who think sooner rather than later, even if you pass a Brexit deal.
Yeah, okay, so probably heading to an election in the next 12 months, possibly in the next 3 months. Tom Harwood, Katy Balls, thanks very much.